The room went quiet the moment everyone realized he wasn't joking. Phones stopped tapping, a half-smile froze on his boss's face, and the air felt heavier than it had a second before. No one expected a single father who barely spoke in meetings to answer like that. No one expected honesty to land so hard. And as he stood there, hands shaking but voice steady, he knew this one response, this one moment, was about to change far more than his job. He had learned long ago how to disappear in plain sight. Every morning, he arrived early, left late, and kept his head down. He didn't join office gossip, didn't complain about deadlines, didn't ask for favors. Not because he didn't need help, but because life had taught him that asking often came with a price. After his wife passed away 3 years earlier, the world didn't pause. Bills didn't stop. His son still needed lunch packed, homework checked, nightmares calmed at 2 a.m. Grief became something he carried quietly, like a weight no one could see but him. Work was supposed to be the stable part. The place where effort mattered more than explanations. He believed that, until the morning his manager called him into the conference room with that careful tone people use when they think they're being kind. The company was restructuring. New leadership. New expectations. Travel would increase. Late nights would be the norm. Flexibility, she said, was no longer optional. He listened, nodding, already calculating school pickup times, babysitter costs, the fragile routine that kept his son smiling. Then came the sentence that cornered him. The one delivered like a fact, not a choice. "We can make this work," she said, folding her hands, "but there's only one room left in the plan." At first, he didn't understand. Then she explained. A mandatory out-of-town project. Weeks at a time. No exceptions. Everyone else around the table nodded. Some even smiled, eager to prove themselves. He felt his chest tighten. He thought of his son waiting by the window every evening, counting the minutes until he came home. He thought of promises made at a small graveside, that no matter how hard things got, he would always show up. The room waited for his answer. He could have lied. Said he'd figure it out. He could have smiled and agreed, like he had agreed to so many things since becoming a single parent. But something inside him finally refused to bend. He took a breath, felt his heart pounding in his ears, and spoke. "I can't do that," he said quietly. "Not because I don't care about this job. But because I'm the only parent my son has. And if there's only one room left, then it shouldn't cost him his father." No one spoke. His boss blinked, clearly unprepared. Someone shifted in their chair. He expected frustration, maybe even anger. He expected to be labeled, not a team player. Instead, the silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, because his honesty had exposed something everyone else preferred not to look at, the human cost behind corporate decisions. He walked out of that room unsure if he'd just ended his career. That night, he tucked his son into bed like always, reading the same worn storybook, answering the same questions. But inside, fear sat heavy. He didn't sleep much. He stared at the ceiling, wondering how close he was to losing the one thing keeping their lives afloat. The next morning, he went to work expecting the worst. What happened instead surprised him. His boss asked him to sit down again, this time without the formal tone. She admitted she hadn't thought about it that way. That policies were easy to enforce until a real person stood in front of you and refused to be reduced to a bullet point. Other team members had spoken up after he left. One had a sick parent. Another was barely holding their marriage together because of constant travel. His words had given them permission to admit it. The company didn't change overnight. But they adjusted. Remote options were added. Schedules were staggered. The one room left rule quietly disappeared. More importantly, he changed. For the first time since his wife's death, he stopped believing that being strong meant being silent. He realized strength could also look like drawing a line and saying, "This is where I stand." His son noticed it too, not in words, but in presence. In relaxed shoulders. In laughter that came easier. In a father who no longer looked like he was bracing for impact all the time. Months later, at a small school event, his boss attended as a sponsor. She watched him kneel to tie his son's shoelaces, listened to the boy proudly introduce his dad. When she met his eyes, she smiled, not the corporate smile, but a real one. The kind that says, "I see you now." The moment that once threatened to break him became the one that redefined him. Not because he won an argument, but because he chose truth over fear. Because he proved that being cornered doesn't mean being defeated. Sometimes, it means finally standing tall enough to be heard. And long after the meeting was forgotten, long after job titles changed, one thing remained certain. His son would grow up knowing this. When the world asked his father to choose between success and love, he didn't hesitate. He answered in a way that left everyone speechless, and showed that the bravest response is often the most human one of all. The call came just as he was buckling his son into the car, the small click of the seatbelt echoing louder than usual in the quiet morning. For a second, he considered letting it go to voicemail. His stomach tightened, that familiar instinct warning him that life was about to ask for something again. He answered anyway. As he listened, his grip on the phone loosened, then tightened, because this wasn't the call he had prepared himself for, not at all. It wasn't about punishment or replacement. It was about consequences rippling outward in ways he never imagined. Word of that meeting had traveled faster than he expected. Not in a dramatic, gossip-filled way, but quietly, through side conversations and late-night messages. Other departments began asking questions. Why did flexibility suddenly feel like a favor instead of a right? Why were good employees burning out while pretending they were fine? He hadn't intended to start anything. He only wanted to protect his son. Yet somehow, his refusal had cracked something open. At work, people looked at him differently now. Not with pity, and not with admiration either, something more honest than both. A few coworkers stopped him in the hallway just to say thank you. One admitted she had gone home that night and cried, realizing how close she was to losing herself to a job that would replace her without hesitation. Another said he finally asked for parental leave after years of being afraid it would make him look weak. Each conversation left him stunned. He had thought he was alone in his fear. He wasn't. He had just been the first to say it out loud. Still, change never comes without resistance. There were whispers too. Comments about commitment. About ambition. About whether he was still leadership material. On harder days, those words stuck to him. Doubt crept in late at night, when the house was quiet and his son was asleep. He wondered if he had unknowingly set a ceiling over his own future. If choosing presence now meant sacrificing stability later. Those were the nights he sat at the kitchen table, bills spread out, wondering how thin a man could stretch before something tore. Then came the moment that sealed everything. The company announced a new pilot program, flexible work structures, optional travel rotations, and performance measured by outcomes, not hours spent visible. During the meeting, his boss paused, looked directly at him, and said, "This started because someone reminded us why work exists in the first place." No name was mentioned, but everyone knew. The room filled with quiet applause, the kind that doesn't demand attention but gives it freely. That evening, he picked his son up from school earlier than usual. They stopped for ice cream, something they rarely did on weekdays. His son talked non-stop, swinging his legs, completely unaware of how close his father had come to losing moments like this. As they sat there, sticky fingers and laughter between them, he felt something shift inside, a release he hadn't known he was holding back. For the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was living without apology. Life didn't suddenly become easy. There were still deadlines, still pressure, still days when exhaustion hit hard. But now, when he walked into work, he did so without shrinking. He spoke up. He set boundaries. And surprisingly, the respect followed. Not from everyone, but from the people who mattered. Years later, his son would remember this chapter not as a story about work, but as a lesson about courage. He would remember a father who showed him that being cornered doesn't mean surrendering who you are. It means choosing what matters, even when your voice shakes. Especially then. And that is why, when people say one honest moment can't change much, they're wrong. Sometimes, it changes everything, quietly, deeply, and forever. Years from now, no one would remember the meeting agenda or the spreadsheet on the screen that day. But one thing would remain unforgotten: the moment a tired single father chose truth over fear. Because in a world that constantly asks us to bend, to stay silent, to trade our lives for approval, he proved something rare and powerful: dignity is not something a job gives you. It's something you protect. His son would grow up knowing this without ever being taught directly. He would feel it in the way his father showed up. In school events never missed. In dinners eaten together. In the quiet confidence of a man who refused to disappear for success. That lesson would shape him more than any promotion ever could. And long after titles changed and offices emptied, this truth would echo louder than any applause: when you are cornered, you don't need to fight or run. Sometimes, all it takes is one honest answer, spoken with courage, to leave the world speechless and your legacy unbreakable.